What were Sundays like on the farm?
Sundays were quiet days. They literally were. The field hands and my grandfather and the uncle who lived on the farm, they did not do any heavy work at all. They were we work 6 days and on the seventh day we rest.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a principle is the way they operated.
Mm-hmm.
And there'd be a lot of reading, there'd be a lot of walking, there'd be a lot of family sharing. Family would visit each other from in town and the next town up. Some of the family was in a little town called East Troy.
Mm-hmm.
Some were in town in Genoa City. So it was a family sharing day,
Mm-hmm.
in one place or another. That's what I remember Sundays mostly as.
What about going to church?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's the way the day started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there any marked difference between going to church in New York City versus going to church on the farm?
Yeah, primarily going to church on the farm was in a small country church.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that there was a basement room, and then there were steps that went up to from the front to the main room, and that was the church.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't any outlying buildings or anything. It was literally a building that was built for worship. Period. That's all it was done.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have all sorts of classrooms. Maybe there was a little division down below for Sunday school classes, kind of a thing. But it was basically a box,
Mm-hmm.
a box with a steeple and a bell,
Yeah.
and that was about it. As you see on so many country churches.
Yeah. Did you
Except
feel?
it was out in the country. It was in the town.
Sure. Did you feel any more compelled or closer to God or anything in either one of the two churches?
There, as opposed to New York City, you
Yeah.
mean?
Like, did it, either one? Because you're obviously a very strong believer in
Still.
your faith still, and I'm curious if that harkens back to either one of those two places in particular.
No, because growing up, both in the city, in New York City, as well as on the farm, the fact that God was always a basic premise.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean doubt didn't enter into it. As I was growing up, I had plenty.
Mm-hmm.
But it was mostly it was not a religion of being against anything like so much religion seems to be today,
Mm-hmm.
especially among the more fundamental Bible churches. It seems to be a lot of against kind of religion. It wasn't that at all.
Mm-hmm.
It was just an acceptance of that fact that God is. After all, they were growing things. They were living with real living things all the time. That was their work,
Mm-hmm.
was to, I suppose, I hadn't thought of it this way, but I suppose in a sense they were helping God grow the earth,
Sure.
kind of a thing. They were tending to the business of keeping it going in a very direct contact kind of a way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was just one of those natural things that, hey, it's of course, that's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
And in New York, my father was always directing a church choir. And he directed church choirs, and I think I've mentioned the Gospel Tabernacle, which is related with the Christian Missionary Alliance denomination. And it was pretty much the same way. It was not a beginner kind of a fundamentalist religion as we see too much of today. It was accepting what was and expanding on it. And then when he went, I remember later on, he accepted a position as music director at a congregational church in the Bronx, just north of the Isle of Manhattan, abuts with the Bronx just north of it. And there was a congregational church there, which is now named something else, but Um, it was the same thing. It was a little bit more head trip religion
Mm-hmm.
there than in some of the simpler religion. But there was no such thing as, we struggle a lot with our religion kind of an experience. Not at all.
Okay.
It was just more or less an acceptance of what is, and how do you build on what that means.
So there's some continuity between the two.
There was an interconnection. And then I remember that when we moved out to Long Island, my father continued at that church in the Bronx. He'd take subway and so forth to get in
Mm-hmm.
the city and then up to the Bronx. Friends of theirs picked my brother and me up, and we would go to Central Baptist Church on West 57th Street in New York City. And I remember that's where, and this is the Baptist church. It was not the same as Southern Baptist Church.
Okay.
This is what was nowadays they call the American Baptist Church, which is a little bit more open and broader based theologically than the Southern Baptist Convention, as they call it, is. And so I was baptized there. I almost drowned.
Really?
Well, when they put you under, and they have this great big huge baptismal font, and you go in there, walk in with a robe, and we're all in robes. And somebody puts their hand over your face, and you're supposed to hold your nose or you hold your breath. I didn't, and so I thought I was going to drown. Came up sputtering and spitting.
Oh wow! How old were you when that happened?
12.
12. Yeah.
That's when in the Baptist church you get baptized.
Yeah. Glad you made it past that.
Yeah. Then when my father went to teach up in Houghton, New York, at that college that was a Wesleyan Methodist school.
Mm-hmm.
There was only one church in the town, and it was a Wesleyan Methodist church, and that's where we had our first exposure to real, what we would now call fundamentalism.
Okay.
Where they have what we call altar calls every service, whether it's a Sunday morning worship or Sunday evening worship or a Wednesday evening, which we had every week. Wednesday, there would always be an altar call where you had to go and confess your sins and so forth. And of course, being a teenager, I had plenty.
Okay. One quick question about the farm again. Was Grandpa Gifford an authoritarian figure?
No.
Really?
He had authority. No question who was the final arbiter of anything that had to be decided.
Mm-hmm.
There was no question about it, but I think I've described him as a gentle man. In this day and age, we might even call him quietly elegant. Not elegant in the put-on sense at all, but in the personally self-controlled and self-restrained kind of a way. There was no question about the fact that when hard decisions had to be made and somebody had to make those final decisions, he would make them.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that very clearly about them. I can't remember any of the decisions, but it was always a very easy house to live in.
Mm-hmm.
It really was. I think these two New York kids, my brother and me, when we came to visit up there, we probably stirred up more trouble than anything else that went on up there. Is my guess. I don't know.
Sure. Let's see here. Back to your young life with your father teaching. What approach did he?
Sorry about that. I'm just going to put this out, I think. I can't turn it off. I just realized that. All right. Somebody else got it. It's okay.
Cool.
No problem.
We got 20 minutes left on this.
Okay. We'll work on that. Just checking. Okay. So yeah, when you were back to New York, when you were with your father teaching music, what approach did he use? Would you actually go over each note with him, or did he let you? Did he test you directly or indirectly? And what happened when you succeeded and failed? I know you described making you read the small notations.
Let me say a couple of things first, and then I'm going to put off answering that in depth.
Okay.
because I understand that we're pretty close to the end of the recording device.
I have a second. I have a second camera
Okay,
for that. So
but I'll say this preliminarily that my father was, because of his background, was an authoritarian person. He did not know how to be anything else. I didn't realize that at the time. I just knew that he was a slave driver.
Mm-hmm.
And if I didn't do things exactly the way he wanted them done, I was in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I was in trouble, and the way as a student of music, was if I played wrong notes in the violin, and he was teaching me them. He had a ruler in his hand, and I got my fingers hit.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a tear-stained violin in those days, literally. So that was pretty much the approach. It was very authoritarian, and I was just not. I just didn't handle it well. I was just, I guess, a normal kid. I don't know, but the direct process of learning music went on anyway, mostly because I had apparently enough natural gift so that I absorbed a lot anyway. And there were other ways that I learned about music, and I'd like to speak to that when we get a chance to go on at some depth. But it was a pretty severe way to start learning music. Mm-hmm. And I could read music, by the way, before I went to kindergarten.
Yeah.
And I was reading books before, not books, but I was reading whatever those little things that little kids read. But I was reading before I went to kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
So there was nothing about a dull mind or a stupid kid.
Yeah.
I learned fast, and I apparently had enough gift for music to learn it very quickly. But it was not an easy trip in the early years, not at all, not at all.
How did you, because all children do it, how did you find ways to make up excuses to get out of chores, or find ways
There weren't any excuses.
Really?
No. There were no excuses that were adequate. My father was very good at pulling off his belt. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Thank God. But he was very good at ruling, I guess, as he was ruled.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the reality.
What about on the farm when he wasn't around? Like, did you have more freedom to,
Yes.
to enjoy yourself?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that I didn't push my mother's limits either.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I did.
Yeah.
In fact, I know I did. Yeah.
Did you have a go-to excuse to get out of, or a story to get out of doing chores or anything like that?
Well, I was always good at making excuses, but parents have a way of figuring them out, don't they?
I suppose so. Yeah. Yeah. What? Let's see here. When you when you were living in New York City, were you? You have a note here about the Riverside Church and the St. Agnes School and skipping grades.
When we lived up on 121st Street, we lived in that apartment house that I've described, I think, the last time. There was a school in an Episcopal church, St. Agnes Church, 2, 3, 4 blocks away. And that's where I started kindergarten. I don't have any idea how that was chosen for my brother and me, but and I remember that's where we had the opportunity to read to the other kids and so forth during kindergarten. I remember that when it was time to be promoted to the first grade, I went to first grade for one day, and they said, and they moved me to the second grade.
Really?
And in private school, I guess you can do that. I remember that it was quite a good experience, I remember, at that school. I don't remember much in the way of detail about it, except during kindergarten year, I can remember in the little circle of kids in the class, I remember that I would often be given the whatever book there was to read to the other kids, because I could read. Mm-hmm. and make sense out of it. but I don't remember an awful lot. I remember we cooked peas one day. I assume in kindergarten. I don't know.
Mhm.
It was a good place. I still have good feelings about that little place. Then there is the look about walking out the front door of our apartment building, which was on 121st Street on the corner of Broadway. You would look to your right, and there was Riverside Church, which Rockefeller had built.
Mhm.
Sort of his personal church kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Is the way it's often been described in the early years, especially. It's become quite something other than that now. But I remember we used to go up there every once in a while. My father was very fond of the fact that it had one of the best organs in the world, and it had bells, complete set of real, honest to gosh, ringing bells
Yeah.
that they would play music on, and it was a wonderful kind of an atmosphere to be close to hear bells. I love bells.
Yeah.
Always have.